Welcome into the Autzen Audibles podcast. I'm at Prehm, Erik, Skopil, John Evans on the show. Welcome to another edition. We did this last week on a Thursday, I believe. We dove into the offensive side of the football. Now it's time to dive into the defensive side of the football. And it's a unit that brought back some starters, had some key pieces that were on this team from multiple year over year. And we also saw some newcomers kind of throw their way into the lineup, make drastic impacts for this Oregon defense. I think, you obviously look first at Dylan Thieneman at the safety position, Jaden Kennedy at the star position. You also look at a guy like Bear Alexander, who joined a extremely loaded defensive line unit and somehow pushed his way into the starting lineup towards the end of the year. Was a really good group. This was one that felt like one of the best defenses in the country. Certainly had its moments where they bent a lot, but they never truly felt like they broke. Maybe against the one team that went undefeated in college football, Indiana. But I think
there was some breaking there, Matt. I think they broke a little bit there.
Yeah, I think there was some breaking, but they were also put in some difficult positions. Indiana had 4 touchdowns in the Peach Bowl where they had to drive 75 yards. That's hard for any defense to have to do. But you're correct also that there was definitely some breaking there. Overarching theme, do we look at 2025 and its performance on the defensive side of the football as an elite unit, one of the best units defensively, or is there room for growth that's needed going into 2026 for a unit if they want to win a national championship?
I almost want to say both. I think there were traits that were really elite, and there were games we just talked about how they broke a little bit against Indiana. We forget that the game before that against Texas Tech was celebrated as maybe the best defensive performance in postseason history ever. It was the first shutout in 100 years. Completely dominated Texas Tech. And Texas Tech, which was statistically coming in, remember, like a top offense. Statistically, they had a very similar profile to Indiana, and Oregon shuts one out and gives up 56 in the other. Matt's right to point out, there were 4 drives where they barely had to move the ball because special teams, turnovers, et cetera, made it really easy on them. But yeah, I think there were moments where it did feel like they were elite. And I also feel like there are areas that they can improve. And I guess one thing I'll be fascinated by, just kind of a big picture here with Chris Hampton taking over for Tosh, is that aggression on passing downs, which wasn't quite as, I guess, it didn't feel like they ever really turned that corner in terms of impacting the quarterback aside from Tech. Aside from when they kind of unleashed a little bit there. And that was a game where Tech got behind and had to throw, and Oregon was able to kind of unleash. But, one of the things that I think was interesting, over the course of the season was Tosh talking about that trade-off between aggression, but also giving up the big play. And I think maybe we overlook that a little bit, but I also think there's something to be said that against Oregon, Fernando Mendoza had an awful lot more time to kind of make decisions than you'd probably like in retrospect. And there's probably a little bit more of that balance of hey, don't give up the big play, which Oregon was excellent at all season, but also be a little more impactful in the backfield. So I guess that would be where I would lean. And really, I think they were pretty solid in every phase of the game. And a team like Indiana is just good enough to find solutions. And they certainly did that on the biggest stage.
I agree with you, Erik, where I think they at this point are one of the best defense in the country and have clearly established that. But, there's always room to get better. There's always things to continue to improve at. Like you're saying with the pass rush, they have a really solid, really good group up there up front, and to bring all 4 of those guys back is going to be a huge advantage over so many of the teams that they play. But they weren't super consistent in terms of their ability to win with 4 on those third downs and stuff like that. So that's where you would give those teams a little bit more time. That's where you need Mateo and Tatum to really be creating havoc and getting home to the quarterback. You need Amari to be able to win, with his pass rush, his bull rush up the middle, and force the quarterback outside to those guys. This defense is really, really talented. It's going to be really talented again next year, but it's just about taking that next step, that next level to be that consistency every game where you don't run into those things like Indiana.
8 starters are back, to John's point. The 3 guys that are gone, starting safety Dylan Thieneman, who declared early for the draft. Jaden Kennedy ran out of eligibility. I think he's going to get drafted.
Yep.
Bryce Betcher, who also ran out of eligibility, he will also get drafted. Everybody's back. There's also 3 freshmen that were in the starting lineup. Ife Obadigwu, Aaron Flowers were both redshirt freshmen, and then Brandon Finney was true freshman. You're in a position where you're going to have, like up front, where they go in with 2 guys for sure that are basically 4-year starters along the defense. You're setting yourself up for the back end in 3 years where you could potentially have 3 guys that are 3-year or 4-year starters for your secondary. There's a lot of youth. There's also, I think it's like a perfect blend of experience. You look at Jerry Mixon's going to be a senior next season at linebacker. He's kind of your star player there at that position. You've got 4 seniors up front. We'll see what happens on the back end in terms of any older players start, but the experience is all over the place. And I think maybe we should start here with the defensive, and we go to the defensive line.
Yeah.
I think all 4 guys, Tatum Tuioti, Bear Alexander, Amari Washington, and Mateo Uyunglele, all 4 NFL players. And the guys behind them are going to be different. Terrence Green's gone, obviously. Ashton Porter's gone. Tione Gray's gone. Blake Purchase is gone, and others. But I still think that this unit should have the expectation of being a top 5 defensive front in the country. That feels very like conservative. I almost want to say top 3. And I expect, and you almost kind of have to demand it to your guys' point, you need to be able to create more of a pass rush. You need to be able to create more of a pressure on the quarterback, because it felt like in the 2 games that they lost to Indiana, they were unable to generate a consistent pressure on Fernando Mendoza. And life was easy for him in the backfield. And when you play elite quarterbacks, it's really hard to win when they have time.
Yeah, that feels like the overarching kind of angle for this group. I think Oregon fans should be ecstatic about all 4 of these guys being back. To me, that was a tie with Dante returning for the biggest storyline probably post the Indiana game that ended the season. Like these guys could have all gone, and I would have been perfectly acceptable decisions based upon draft projections, right? Like I think there's a chance that both Amari and Mateo could have been 1st-round picks. I think the other 2 would have been day 2 picks. Like it's possible all 4 would have been gone in the first 3 rounds if they would have been in this draft. Like I don't think that's a huge reach. And it's probably not even that. So to have those players back is a huge win. And I think at the middle of this defense, like I'm excited to see what Amari in particular, like the growth there, because I think the athletic traits, the upside are so apparent. We also forget this was a 1st-year starter who was at times inconsistent, at other times just was like I know John had a lot of clips he pulled for social of just like him beating the center essentially off like the snap. Like he's like in the backfield before the guard's almost out of his stance. I mean, he is so quick. And so I think there's another gear there that could really, Matt says top 3, top 5 defensive line in the country, that like he feels like a player that can really take that next step, that next leap. And maybe this is the best defensive line in the country. I'd have to do the exercise to like really know who else would be in that conversation. And if there's like someone could post in the comments, like this certain defensive line is so elite that Oregon shouldn't be in that conversation. But I think that feels attainable. This is the best defensive front nationally. That feels like a thing we could be saying at some point during the season, but it'll take some growth. And then I'll pass it to John here if he has any more thoughts on a starting 4. There's some real interesting conversations to be had about kind of who backs those guys up, because as Matt ran through there, essentially the 2nd line is all gone. The 3rd line is pretty much gone. And there's very few returning continuity from a reserve defensive line edge player perspective. So we'll have a conversation there. But John, just your thoughts to bring all 4 of those guys back, maybe some things that you're excited to see from them in 26.
I mean, like you were saying, I think all 4 of those guys would be going at least by day 2 of the draft this year. To be bringing that back to a college level is easily going to put you at one of the top lines in the country, especially run defense wise. This team is going to be really hard to run the football on, and you have guys who can win in their gaps up front. Amari Berry and then Mateo and Tatum are 2 of the best edge setters and run defenders on the edge. The question is, like I was saying, can you get home with 4? Mateo actually, I was just looking at the numbers. He had 20 more pressures this season than he did last season, even though the sack numbers weren't necessarily there. It's the same it's kind of a similar situation, I think, where it was with Tatum this year, where the sacks were there for Tatum and not for Mateo, because Mateo draws a little bit more of that attention now because you have to game plan around a guy like that. I think Amari is like you were saying, the really guy that can take this to the next level. I think interior defensive line has been such an undervalued position for so long. And if you have a guy that can be a game wrecker on the inside, it's just such a force multiplier for the defense. And Amari really has the potential to do that. Like you were saying, I mean, we saw the placement on Bruce Feldman's freaks list last year. That's why people were saying he could be a guy who was in first round conversations this year. If he gets another year and cleans that up, he could be going, potentially top half of the first round with his pure athletic traits. Because if you have a guy winning on the inside like that, it just does so much for the rest of the defense. Interior pressure is so much more valuable than I think people really realize, because you think about the edge guys coming around and getting the sacks, but if you have a guy who can consistently disrupt on the inside, like think about how good how much chaos someone like Aaron Donald creates on the inside of a defense for the Rams when he was in his prime. Not just the sacks that he makes, but what he does for his teammates. If Amari can kind of put that to action next season and really become one of those top guys like Jalen Carter was for Georgia a couple seasons ago, it could turn this defense to the next level.
Erik, you brought it up. They got decimated in depth. And I think a big question here becomes, they've added 5 guys in the portal to the defensive line or to the edge positions. Most recently, Derek Brown Jr., a Howard transfer, DeAndre Robinson from North Carolina, Blow Dantzler from Oregon State, Jerome Simmons from University of Louisiana Monroe, and then Marcus Dixon from Clemson, but he's actually moving over to tight end. So it's actually 4 guys up front that they've added to this unit. How quickly can these guys assimilate themselves into the program, and how big of an impact can these guys give? I think DeAndre Robinson is a significant upgrade, or not upgrade, but a significant addition to the team, will contribute, will play, will be a regular rotation guy. I don't know about Derek Brown Jr. I don't know about Dantzler. I don't know about Jerome Simmons. How much can you get out of those guys? Where is the development in terms of a guy like Matthew Johnson, who I think maybe some of the writing was on the wall for some of these guys, that this guy is coming up through the ranks. He played in the playoffs, and he played in every game. He played on a regular basis. That's number one of how much does he develop? How much does an Aiden Breland, who's still here, develops a defensive tackle? And then on the edges, Elijah Rushing, a 5-star guy that hasn't played a ton. Opportunity is here now. He played in 6 games in 2025. Can he make an impact? That's going to be the big question for me. It's how much can you play the top 4 guys, and then when they have to come off, how big of a drop off is it going to be?
I think you nailed it there with the assessment of the transfers. I think Robinson on paper is a better player than Green and Gray based upon PFF grades, based upon snaps played, based upon experience, starting games, based upon actual production. So I'm not saying he's a better player than them, but I think that really alleviates some of that loss. Like I'm anticipating this is a guy who's going to play 16 to 18 snaps, which is what those 2 guys both did last year for Oregon on the interior. Like that feels pretty clear. Who that other tackle is, I don't know. And I have really zero feel for both Brown and Simmons, who've played at a much lower level. And frankly, you kind of do the deep dive. Neither of them were overly productive. I think these are just like big athletic bodies that Oregon's kind of taking flyers on. So you hope maybe one of those 2 guys hits and can be a contributor. But I really think Johnson and Breland are the names to watch in the interior for guys to take that step. And I'll throw Tony Cumberland in there just as a true freshman, who I know Chris Hampton yesterday was hyping up as someone they expect could be a contributor early. They're going to need some of these younger guys to be able to take that step. And Johnson in particular, for me, feels like when he was playing, I would say he was more impressive than Aiden Breland, Breland was like essentially, I don't know if you have this pulled up, John, but like Breland was essentially a pass rush specialist. I feel like I don't know if he played hardly at all on run defensive downs. I don't know if you have that there. I should have pulled that up.
I got him with 12 snaps of run defense this year, 49 snaps of pass rushing.
Right. So that was a specialist kind of role. And you just wonder, like, can you play him on early downs? Is that a concern? obviously he's big and twitchy and athletic, and he'll be a valuable player on pass rush downs. But that's kind of where my head's at. I kind of felt like that was what was slowing him down there. And then off the edge, like Nasir Wyatt's a name we have to bring up, who's just so exciting as a pass rusher. Like I wouldn't be surprised if he has 6 to 8 sacks this upcoming season if given enough run. I do wonder, and this is something I'll throw to you, John, of like who can be that Blake Purchase role was like a pseudo starter or playing a huge snap count even when Mateo and Tatum were on the field as like an additional linebacker in certain packages. I'm not sure I like Wyatt or Rushing to be that based upon skill sets and body type. Like, do you have somebody that you're kind of thinking can be the Blake Purchase replacement? Because that was low key a huge loss for a variety of reasons. I'm not saying Purchase is like a player you can't replace because he was such an elite talent, but he was playing a lot and played a pretty specific role. I don't know. Like, have you identified, John, maybe an idea of who you like there?
I mean, I have Wyatt slotted into that jack linebacker role on my depth chart right now. He is a different player than Purchase, but just I think he's athletic enough that you can put him in space and drop him into coverage if you need to, and then he can be that extra pass rusher. Because you have what you have up front in terms of bringing all 4 of those starters back, you're afforded kind of the opportunity to not have to have as much depth. You don't need those guys to make as much of an impact behind them. You just need them to kind of give those guys a blow so that when Amari's out there, he can be at the top of his game. But I think the big thing with me is just kind of the shift in body types you have, especially on the interior of the defensive line. You went from Terrence Green, Tion Gray, Jericho Johnson. All 3 of those guys are 330, 340, like huge guys who can play a legitimate nose tackle, can play a 1-tech in the A-gap. You know, DeAndre Robinson's, I think, 6'4", like 315 or so, but didn't really play much of a nose at all last year. Garrett Brown, similar, a little bit smaller, I think he was listed under 300 pounds. Jerome Simmons is the guy who is going to just eat blocks in the middle, but I think you're going to be asking Amari to play more nose and next to a guy like DeAndre Robinson. And then I think I agree with you too, where I think the biggest thing you're counting on for these backups is development from the young guys, because I don't think you're expecting Jerome Simmons to necessarily come in and be a super impactful guy. You want Aiden Breland to be stepping in and being that pass rush down type of guy. I think him and Johnson, both of them being able to play that 3-tech, kind of let Amari slide back to the nose a little bit. Just kind of that versatility, or kind of to have a bit of that depth where you have guys who can really be impact pieces instead of just bodies out there, I think is going to be really big. Elijah Rushing too. I think he's going to be huge. If you can have another guy behind Mateo and Tatum just to give those guys a rest, I think that's going to be really big for this team. Just need that kind of development.
Let's move to linebacker here for a second, where Bryce Betcher, his college career has finally ended, and showed up in 2022 as a walk-on safety, moved down the linebacker special teams guy, and then 23-20, he was kind of a expanded role a little bit, started a couple games at linebacker, and then the last 2 seasons, 28 games played, 27 starts for the Ducks, which kind of the heart and soul of the defense. Replacing him is going to be a task. And this is no slight to Betcher, but I think from the physical attributes, they can probably find some guys that can equal what he does, but it's the IQ, it's the understanding of the defense, it's the leadership traits. That's where it's going to be, I feel like, a dip. And how long is that dip going to be there until guys can step up? Jerry Mixon exploded on the scene in 2025. 14 games played, 12 starts for the Ducks. The guy that was all over the place for Oregon, had a pick 6. I think he's got an opportunity to – I think Betcher will get drafted. I think Jerry Mixon's got the next in line to hear his name called. I'd be really curious, too, had he gone pro this season, what his draft profile would have been like. Probably wouldn't have been a day 2 pick, but I wouldn't have been surprised if he would have gotten picked at the back end. But ultimately, guys, this feels like Devin Jackson's had plenty of opportunities, and this is as wide open as it's been for him to really secure a spot. He's started 3 games over the course of his 4 seasons so far in Eugene. He's played a lot of football, but it just feels like every year his usage goes down just a little bit, or part of his role gets given to somebody else. And is he now in a position where he can slide into Bryce Betcher's spot, or Jerry takes Bryce's spot and Devin takes Jerry's original spot? Or do we see a guy like a Gavin Nix or a Braden Platt step in here and earn the starting role and flourish? Do we see a newcomer, someone like Tristan Phillips, who Hampton has called him this, and Dan Lanning has said Bryce Betcher 2.0, very similar traits, very similar body types, personalities, old school linebacker. This is a fascinating battle to see play out. We know Mixon's got one spot, but who takes the other? And then who falls in line behind both those spots?
Yeah, no, and just another thing on the Bryce Betcher traits you're replacing, there's like that tenacity, killer instinct, competitor, all of those things along with the IQ. Like, I agree. Who's the green dot is a good question. That'll be something we ask in spring. Mixon wasn't the green dot this last year. That was Bryce. I wonder if there's a position change, if there's a responsibility change, and they just go, hey, Mixon's our most gifted guy. Or if like you said, like one of these younger guys or a Devin Jackson really emerges, do they earn that responsibility? That's a big question mark for a defense, right? Like 8 of 11 starters back, but they do lose the guy who's the signal caller, right? And this is the quarterback of the defense essentially is gone. It's just not an insignificant loss. So yeah, no, that part is huge. And I'm not surprised, I guess, they didn't hit a portal linebacker, but gosh, would it have made sense? And I say I'm not surprised because we know Coach Michalowski's kind of on record of like, if I have to use the portal, that means that's a shortcoming of me in development and player acquisition from the high school ranks. It's going to be put to the test if that's the right decision pretty quickly here. And I frankly anticipate one of the 3 younger guys probably positioning themselves as the second starter. I'm just not sold on Devin Jackson. Maybe that's going to sound crazy. The athletic traits are off the charts. I've been a big Devin Jackson like supporter fan the whole time, just because sub 10, 6 in the 100, maybe sub 10, 5. I'm trying to remember the time. It was like 10.49 or 10.59 as a 100-meter at a 220-pound body. Sounds awfully enticing at the middle of the defense in terms of running north, south, east, west, all that. Just hasn't come together. And so maybe this is the year it clicks. I'm just tired of being the one to say, maybe this is the year, and it isn't the year. So I look at Platt and Williams as 2 guys in particular that were injured in fall camp last year that supposedly were pushing to play a lot in 2025, missed a bulk of the season, like over half in both players' case. Like, I think one of those players needs to emerge as the other starter is kind of how I'm feeling. And probably one of those guys needs to emerge as that green dot to let kind of Jerry do what Jerry does best, which seems to be kind of play free safety at linebacker essentially, and just kind of make improvise and run around and do some kind of fun things on pass downs. Like, that's not to diminish his game. That probably comes across that way, but I'm curious to see what this looks like. And then also to Matt's point, like, could a Tristan Phillips or Braylon Hodge, one of these freshmen, actually be impactful right away? That would change the dynamics. And I think it's probably easy to say like, oh boy, linebackers the weakest position group. And I think when we do the position group rankings at the end of this podcast, I'm guessing that's probably where we'll land collectively. I also just wouldn't suggest they're going to be awful, because I think it's easy to say like, oh, they lose Betcher, they didn't add anyone in the portal, like this is going to be a huge glaring weakness. Like, I think linebacker will end up being a fine point, even if it's not as strong as defensive line or secondary, where Oregon frankly has, 4 or 5 guys in both position groups that are NFL players. I don't know if that's the case here, but I think it'll end up okay. I'm understanding of people being like, oh, they're going to be bad. I don't think they're going to be terrible here. I just also think you really need to see some development from some of these younger guys to get to where you need to be.
That's where you really just wish you had that opportunity for guys like Williams and Platt to just not even be on the field this season, but be practicing this season, and that they didn't because of the injuries. And you hope that they can have plenty of that opportunity in spring to kind of get on track for next fall. But I agree with you guys about this linebacking group. Just it's the least comfortable position group I feel with on this defense. And I think Devin Jackson is a big part of that, him being a starter. With his athletic traits, if it was going to be there, I think it would have happened at some point. I think he would have not, kind of been supplanted by Jerry Mixon last season. Although some of that is just because of Jerry Mixon, different skill set and had a really awesome year. But you are really going to miss Bryce Betcher because he's just he's a unique combination at linebacker of the center field athleticism, but he just wants to hit everybody all the time.
Yes.
Jerry Mixon is really super athletic, but doesn't just bring that same physicality. He's not going to be. I'm sure you guys have seen the Senior Bowl clips of Bryce Betcher running over linebackers or running over running backs and stuff.
Right.
Like that's
Getting
not Jerry
fights.
Mixon when he blitzes. So I think you are counting on either Devin Jackson to really finally take that step forward and as a redshirt senior, or some of this development behind him, because you like you said, I think Mixon is going to continue to be that will backer where he's gets to float around a little bit more and do the things that make him really good, which is relying on his athleticism, relying on his instincts, and jumping into passing lanes, jumping into the backfield, because he is one of the most athletic linebackers and can have a really awesome season next year. But you need someone next to him who can kind of bring that other element, that physicality that Betcher brought last season. And Betcher was doing that while also being a really, really athletic guy who was a Gold Glove center fielder.
I have a quick question before we move to the secondary. This year, how many guys do we see play at this position? Because last year in 2025, felt like they played Betcher a lot, they played Jerry Mixon a lot, they played Devin Jackson a lot, and then because of injury, and I think probably because of maybe some guys not being as ready as expected, they didn't really play a fourth guy. Will Stratton played 13 games, 14 games for Oregon as a walk-on. Some of that is special teams, or probably a lot of that is special teams. But do we see Oregon? We saw Mathudi play 6 games. He's now gone. Gavin Nix played in 6 games. Dylan Williams also played in 6 games for Oregon. And then when you look at Braden Platt, he played also in 6 games, and one of those was as a running back. Do we see do we expect them to stick with a 3-headed rotation, or do we see this room maybe expand a little bit? I think at least early on, it's going to expand out and then maybe shrink back as the season progresses and games become more important.
If you go through the snap counts in Dan's time here, there's always been 4. I think they would like to have 4 guys that they play a decent amount. And usually there's a hierarchy of like 2 or 3 that are playing the real bulk of the snaps. Like I was just looking here at 2024 as kind of an example, because it was obviously the most recent one. You look at like Bassa, Betcher, Jackson, all over 400 snaps, and then Justin Jacobs played like 180. You're right. This last year, like just to give people some context on kind of what the breakdown was this past year. I mean, Betcher barely left the field. He played 780 snaps. You had Jerry Mixon at 560. You had Devin Jackson at 370. And to Matt's point, like basically no one else played more than 40 snaps. So there were 3 guys this past year. I think they want to play 4. I think they'll find the 4th. I don't have a great sense of who the 4 would be. And maybe, Matt, I just realized we did skip our 2-deep prediction at the end of the D-line group. Maybe we should hit that and the linebackers now and just do a little front 7 prediction, just because I think that helps put into context where we're looking at this. And it just kind of dawned on me when you're talking about 4 guys. Like, I don't know if I know who you think necessarily will be the backup couple or what that breakdown looks like. And I don't necessarily know if I do either.
Sure. Yeah. So obviously the 2 deep is easy to make for. I think the starting lineup is easy to make for the front 7. It's
Agreed.
Mateo, it's Amari, it's Bear, and it's Tatum Tuioti. I also would have Jerry Mixon starting at 1 inside linebacker spot. I think you go by default Devin Jackson right now.
Yeah, probably right.
At the other linebacker spot, but it would probably have an or next to Gavin Nix.
I think I agree with your point just about that early season like kind of time. I think there's going to be a lot of Gavin Nix, Platt, Williams to kind of see who can emerge and be that third, fourth linebacker for this team. So,
yeah, I think there's going to be an or next to Jackson, and there probably could be like 3 ors at that position. To John's point of it be Devin Jackson or Dylan Williams or Gavin Nix or Braden Platt, and you figure out who that hierarchy is there behind the secondary, behind the starters for the front seven, I think there's a couple that are easy. Matthew Johnson will be one of those two interior guys. Aiden Breland will be the other one. On the edge, Elijah Rushing, I think, becomes probably one of your primary backups. Nasir Wyatt is your other one. But I have a hard time not having Tank Jones in the mix.
I was going to say, we did mention his name once so far, and that was part of why I wanted to bring it back, because we need to talk about him.
Where Tank Jones fits is going to be the question.
I have him slotted behind Tatum right now because I have the defensive end, edge rusher, outside linebacker position separated for this team because they kind of have been over the last couple of years, where Mateos plays more of like an actual defensive end. I think for me right now, I got Tank Jones behind Tatum, and but he could float him and Nasir Wyatt. I think will do similar things this season. I think he could kind of have a bit of an impact like Wyatt did for this team this year. But one other thing though, to Matt's point with the backup on the D line, Johnson and Breland aren't going to play next to each other. Just the body types you have of those two guys. Those are both 3-tech, 4-eye guys. Neither of them are going to play inside, play that nose tackle. So I think you end up with one of those guys being Amari's backup, and then Simmons, DeAndre Robinson, because you got to have somebody else who could play some of those nose tackle reps behind Bear and Amari.
So I think Jones, Nasir Wyatt pairing at that outside linebacker spot behind Tatum would be interesting in terms of their skill sets and how they would. I think you could come up with some intriguing rotations on pass downs, but also rundowns with those guys seeing the field collectively. So yeah, I mean that's the part where people get a little bit nervous about the D-line reserves, and I understand it. Think of what caliber of recruits we're talking about and the upside of these guys. Like Tank Jones is a 5-star. Elijah Rushing is a 5-star. Aiden Breland was basically a 5-star. Was like, I think, downgraded on 247. I think on 3 other sites had him as a 5-star. Matthew Johnson was like a top 150 guy. DeAndre Robinson's a guy coming over with like, I think 8 or 9 starts, something like that, from North Carolina at a Power 4 school, played pretty well last year. Like there's the depth on the D line. That's part of the reason I wanted to do that exercise with the 2 deep, just to kind of hammer it home. Like there's some really good players still on that defensive line 2 or line 3 that like the cupboard's not totally bare, even though they lost. It feels like their entire reserve defensive line. So
I have a question. From like spring football is all about experiments, right? Like we see guys focus on skill development. Also, this is your opportunity can this guy do X, Y, or Z? And let's try it out and see it how it works. I wonder, is there any possibility that your Wyatt could maybe move to some kind of inside linebacker, outside linebacker hybrid role? Because his body type is more of a linebacker than a pure edge guy, but he was so valuable and so effective as a pass rusher for Oregon this past season. Do you really want to mess with that? I don't know, but I just look at him and go, man, he was so impactful, so athletic, so freakish. You've got to find ways to get him on the field more, and that could be a path. I don't know.
I love the idea of finding more opportunity for him. I'm curious on the fit at inside linebacker. John, you look like you have an opinion. What do you got?
Yeah, with that, like an Arvell Reese type of role. I don't know if he's necessarily. Arvell Reese is ridiculously strong to have the length and speed that he has off the edge and inside. But that's why I have him at that kind of outside linebacker position that Purchase was playing this last year, because I think he has the athleticism where that you can drop him into coverage at times if you need to, and then bring him on the blitzes. Because I think he's a little bit more athletic even than Blake Purchase was for Oregon this last season if you put him in coverage.
For me, it's all about how he can hold up on rundowns. I just don't know, because like let's do the same split we did with Aiden Breland a second ago. How many runs defensive snaps did Nasir Wyatt play compared to pass? Because I'm going to guess it was like 10-1.
I got 7 snaps of run defense and 32 pass rush opportunities.
Okay, so it's basically the same ratio as Breland. So these are very much a specialist. So I'm just, he hasn't done it, so I'm curious to see how he holds up in that area too.
And just that depth on the edges with the run defense and in general, I think is a question for Oregon behind Mateo and Tatum are 2 of the best run defending edge guys in the country, I think. But I think you're really asking for Elijah Rushing to step up and be another guy who can impact in the way that Ashton Porter did for this team last year, because otherwise, like you're saying, Nasir Wyatt, I just don't think he sets an edge the way that Mateo and Tatum do. Those guys are just 20 to 30 pounds bigger than him. I think Anthony Jones, if Tank Jones can put on a little bit of muscle, I think they're going to just kind of bulk him up a little bit, put 10, 15 pounds on him, kind of in a similar way they did with Tatum over the last couple of years. And I think he could eventually be that guy. But right now you're asking a lot of development from Elijah Rushing to be that third guy who can defend on the edge. Otherwise, it's asking so much over the course of this season that you're going to really be wearing on Tatum and Mateo. And you don't want that by January and December.
All right, let's move to the secondary now. Do we want to break this up as safeties and star, or just?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so let's go safeties first. Dylan Thieneman's obviously gone. He was tremendous, an All-American caliber guy. Could be a day 1 or day 2 draft pick, probably more day 2 than day 1 right now. John would know a better feel for that than I would. But safety, Aaron Flowers is back. Looked really good in a lot of games, a majority of the games, but unfortunately the 2 most important games probably on Oregon's schedule, he kind of got cooked. That would be games against Indiana, and that's just not my opinion. That's his own opinion. That's what he told me after the Peach Bowl, that I played horrible. I was one of the worst games of my life. I will get better. Those are basically the words that he said.
Yep.
He was very distraught about how he performed in that game. You have to replace Jaden Kennedy, who when he was added, he felt like just a depth piece, a really late addition, and turned into one of Oregon's most important players on the defensive side of the football, and a guy that I think is going to be hearing his name called in the NFL and could be very similar to someone like a Nico Reed, who goes kind of unheralded at Oregon to making an active roster and having an impact. Nico obviously didn't get drafted, but I think Jaden Kennedy will.
I don't remember what bowl he's at, if it's the Shrine Bowl or something, but I know he's had a good week of practices. Kennedy.
It was the one that was in Dallas. I think that's the East-West Shrine Bowl.
Yeah.
Now, transitioning to the offseason, you have to replace Dylan. You have to replace Kennedy. Do we have guys on the roster that are returning that feel like automatic replacements, or is the idea going to be that this Oregon defense reloads with a newcomer at these positions?
I think it's newcomer. Coy Parrish is quite frankly the biggest transfer addition of the cycle for Oregon. It's Dylan Thieneman 2.0, but I thought it was interesting when we talked to Cooper Patagna a couple weeks ago. He said there were some pretty clear differences from Parrish and Thieneman in terms of like skill set and style. But either way, highly productive, a lot of accolades, has been a 2-year starter at another Big Ten school. He's a lock to start. I will be I just don't know what to do with Trey McNutt in general, because I know he was really highly thought of during fall ball. Obviously, super big time elite recruit coming in, the highest rated safety the school has ever signed, until Jet Washington just signed recently. So both of them on the roster together. Maybe McNutt's somebody who's capable of pushing Aaron for the role. I doubt Parrich's job is in jeopardy. But that's just a name I wanted to throw out there that I think bears at least acknowledging of there could be some growth there. And we really didn't see him play at all in 25 because of the injury, the broken leg. What does it look like now that he's back? I think nickel is – it felt like Carl Williams. I still think I lean him being the starter. They brought him in as a guy who played there at a high level at Baylor. I also one of the things that was sneaky to me listening to Chris Hampton do the signing day special on a Wednesday when Oregon announced a couple of prep signings is Trevin Watson, the junior college transfer from, I think, San Mateo. He did bring up that he thought he was very similar to Jaden Kennedy and said he would be a slot corner. And so I've got that one kind of sneaky earmarked of maybe that's just a name to be monitoring there as a candidate. And then I'm not sure really for either of you guys, who is the top returning nickel? Who would you perceive as the top candidate to play there? Because Jaden played almost all the snaps, and when he wasn't on the field, it was Dalen Austin, who's now transferred, and I can't remember where he landed at this point. But there's not a guy who played a lot there. Like, could be Dorian Brew, could be like maybe Trey McNutt. They cross-train him. That feels like a weird fit for me positionally, but it feels like those two newcomers are the ones I'm kind of locked in on. But I don't know, is there somebody that sticks out for either of you? Because I think it's a valid question of that position in particular. It doesn't feel like there's a 100% clear-cut Coy Parrish kind of guy to fill in.
I think if you're filling it from the roster currently, I think you would be bringing one of those safeties down, whether that is Trey McNutt or someone like Peyton Woodyard, who played a little bit of slot last year. But I think McNutt is an athlete enough that he could if he cross trained and he could figure it out at the slot. But yeah, I like you were saying with Coy Parrish. I think he slots really nicely into what Thieneman was doing for this team last year. He is a different player, relies a little bit more on just instincts and athleticism stuff. Where Thieneman, you can see how calculated he is as a football player. He knows exactly where to be every single time. But Coy Parrish, box safety will be can be over the top, can move around the different roles in a way that Thieneman did. I think having Aaron Flowers back for this team will be big, just having another year of experience for him, because like you said, some of those big games, it did get a little much, but overall, to have a guy who can come downhill as often as he did, but also play over the top to allow Thieneman to roam in the box is going to be interesting. Was big for this team last year. The interesting one to me is Jet Washington, because he is just such a freak of nature, like you were just saying, becoming Oregon's top-rated safety recruit ever. 6'5", ridiculously long arms, really good athlete. I've heard people talk about could he be moved to linebacker at some point in his career, just because he's such a big guy that you don't know how long you can keep him at safety forever. I'm really excited by the guys they recruited in this class, in this signing class, to play safety, to play the nickel. You talk about Xavier Larice, Devon Benjamin. You just got a lot of really diverse athletes in this secondary. I think that's something that we've seen football shift kind of in that spot in the last couple of years, where Oregon was really running a 3-safety defense this past year with what Jaden Kennedy was doing for this team. And you've seen at the top levels of the NFL with what the Seahawks are doing this year with Nick Emenwari, and what the Ravens do with Kyle Hamilton. Those are special cases because Nick Emenwari and Kyle Hamilton are special players. But if you have a guy who can be an outside linebacker, be a nickel corner, and kind of do all these different things where you don't have to substitute, is huge for the defense. And you can see that kind of in the way that the Oregon's recruiting its athletes. They want guys who can play in the slot, play over the top, kind of do all these versatile roles that you saw from Thieneman, from Kennedy last season.
I would throw out Carl Williams, the fourth. Feels like maybe the leader in the pack, as the guy that wins the job, but he's not a newcomer. If we look at newcomers, I think it's between Trey McNutt, Naeem Offord, and Dorian Brew. Like one of those three feels like they would move into that position, but I don't think that's where they're going to go. I think Carl Williams is coming in, and then the newcomers, Xavier Larice is really, really good. And
that's where he'll probably work too. So I like that. Yeah, good call.
And then Devon Benjamin's played every position in the secondary and is really good at it. And Hampton's talked about that. And I just kind of wonder, maybe that's another guy that gets a look in the slot. But I think this is Carl Williams' job to lose. It's going to be everyone else's job to take it from him. And then I know he didn't play this position a lot, or really at all, at Ohio State. Aaron Scott Jr., where he fits in the secondary, I think is going to be pretty telling. And it might not be at star, because he might slide into maybe a top reserve position at one of the corner spots. And that might be because they move somebody else out to that star position. That's going to be fascinating for me to watch. Maybe that's kind of maybe a transition over to the other side here for a second of just kind of, you've got two starters back. They're going to be sophomores, Brandon Finney and Ife Obadegwu. And then you've got a lot of experience behind them. Naeem Offord played quite a bit this season. You have to replace Theron Johnson, but you've got talent here. And where it all kind of shakes out now is going to be a good question of, does Ife lose his job because someone else steps in and takes it and gets better? I think Brandon Finney's pretty entrenched. I think Iffe's probably realistically entrenched, but if there's one of the two that's got an opportunity to lose their job, it's probably going to be Iffy.
Just one last thought on the star thing. Just talking it out and how many names we brought up and how highly I think of all those players. I know we don't. That's going to be a big shoes to fill with Kennedy. I'm really confident that whoever lands there is really good. And I bring that up because that's exactly how I feel at that corner opposite of Brandon Finney. Yeah, he's a starter. He's probably an All-American in 26, in my opinion, Finney. And there are some things like he gave up a little bit more in coverage to the back half of the season. Seems, I think, targeted him with a little more success. Started with USC than they had early, but we saw what kind of playmaker he is. We know that physical traits, like this is an elite corner. I'm open to the idea that if he isn't the starter full time in 26, if someone's better, and I'm guessing the staff kind of feels the same way, and like there are cases to be made that they will see, like Aneem Offord was the higher rated recruit coming out of high school for a reason. Aaron Scott was also a higher rated recruit. He's a year older than both those guys, or I think 2 years older than Aneem now. Like there's a compelling case that like those guys could push him and win that job. And frankly, we talked about this. Like I thought the 2 weak links in this defense for the most part last year were Aaron Flowers and this second corner. And I think Flowers will get better. And I think probably whoever plays here will be better. Is it Iffy or is it somebody else? And like if we're just doing the breakdown on Iffy and why you would maybe want to see someone else out there, and I'm not saying I'm in that camp, but he led the team with defensive penalties. He had 7 last year. No one else had more than 3. I should say defensive back penalties. That's not the whole defense. He's a little bit handsy and aggressive at times, and that can pay off in coverage. That can also bite you. And there were some games where he really got hit over and over with pass interference calls. So I'm not saying he's not a good player. He's a developmental player too, because he's just a freshman season. We have to remember, but I think that's up for. I think it's fair to suggest like he doesn't win the job because someone beats him out. I also think it's fair to suggest he takes a huge step and learns from it and becomes an all-conference caliber player in 2026. Like I think that's a pretty open trajectory one way or the other. And if I'm leaning one direction, it's the latter, where I think he takes that step and you look up and go, man, Oregon has 2 sophomore lockdown corners out here that are both big, physical, have all the kind of NFL traits that you're looking for at this position, and they're in a great spot. But it is a unique thing where yeah, a guy who started, I think, a dozen games last year, I think it's reasonable to suggest someone will challenge him and maybe win that job from him.
Oregon rotated through 4, even 5 corners at times last season. I think besides Finney, who a preseason All-American most likely is hardly ever going to come off the field. I think you could end up seeing that because you got, like you were saying, Iffy coming back with the experience and developing into his redshirt sophomore season. You got 3 guys behind him who could also really be fighting for that job. Offord had plenty of opportunity last season. We know Aaron Scott coming in as a guy who has that background, but then Dorian Brew, another one who just not really talked about because he was hurt for most of last season until the very end, and even then still didn't get on the field. But like if he can, he was another big time recruit. If one of him Offord, like Scott, any of them could be coming for Iffy's job or just kind of making a rotation between those guys. So I think there is a question of what that second corner will be, but just because you have the options, I think there is some confidence that one of those guys will emerge, kind of develop into that year 2 and give you another, like you're saying, if you have 2 guys like that, big physical sophomore corners, it's going to be a huge advantage over a lot of these teams.
One question I've got is just, you've got 3 guys coming into the program from the high school ranks that are ranked inside the top 125, regardless of position. Mm-hmm. That is those top 100, top 125 type guys are instant impact. Like that's a fair expectation.
Yeah.
And how many of those guys? Those are Jet Washington at safety, Devin Jackson at safety. Those guys are in the top 100, and Devin Benjamin's 123rd. Where and how often do these guys play, if they play at all? Because the first 3 years of the Lanning era, it was no freshmen are going to play. It's you shouldn't expect it. You shouldn't project it.
They're outliers. They're the outliers. They play, right.
And then year 4, Dan Lanning broke that mold and threw it away and played a bunch of true freshmen. And so do we see a repeat of that? And it feels like those are probably your 3 guys that have the best chance of doing it. in the secondary at least. But how often will these guys play? That's what I don't know. And I want to say Jet Washington's going to play a lot, but how much? Like, is it 10 snaps a game? Is it 20 snaps a game? That's what I don't know. And I think that's probably one of the storylines for me is, can these three freshmen crack the two deep and be consistent players?
I mean, there's so much talent in the secondary, and it's all so young, which is why like the future, even Oregon's going to sustain some turnover at this position. There's no question, because some of these guys are going to say, I could make a ton of money and be a starter at another Power 4 school, or I can be a guy who plays 10 snaps a game in Oregon. So that'll happen. Whatever it is, whatever the shakeout is in terms of who wins these jobs long term, like, are going to be incredible. Like, I think it's reasonable to expect over the next however long these guys are, in rotation and they recruit at this level, maybe as long as Chris Hampton's here, and they'll probably be past that all five of these starters every year are going to be NFL guys. Like, I just think that's where this is. That's how I feel about the names we're talking about today. They won't all be NFL draft picks in 26 because a lot of them aren't even eligible until 27, but or I guess it'd be the 28 draft. But I'm looking at this going, like, there's so much talent as we talk this through, as Devin Jackson's name doesn't get brought up until, the 20th minute of us talking about this position group. And that's one of my favorite guys in this class. You know what I mean? So you're right, Matt. Like, I don't know where all these guys fit, and maybe some of them don't fit into playing really serious roles at all in 26, but there's just so much talent. And again, it's talent that's going to be really competitive with each other. It'll kind of probably eat itself alive to a certain degree and force some guys to leave. But Oregon's going to have so many good defensive backs over the next several years. And that's, I think, a huge credit to what Chris Hampton and Rashad Wadood and some of the other guys have been able to get done, because it's silly looking through this. And I'll even, maybe this is the right way to just kind of punctuate this point, Matt. Run through your two deep from the defensive backfield, and I bet you there are 4 or 5 guys that we think are awesome football players who aren't even in that two deep for you.
Yeah, so we'll start at the cornerback position. Brandon Finney and Ife Obadegwu are your starters. Dorian Brew and Naeem Offord are your backups. At the star position, I've got Carl Williams, the fourth, starting. And then I've got a true freshman, Devon Benjamin, or I have an or here, or Xavier Larice, finding their way on the field there. And then the two deep at the safety positions, Coy Perch at one safety, Aaron Flowers returning as another, with Peyton Woodyard or Jet Washington backing up Perch, and Trey McNutt behind Flowers.
So many good players there, and so many that we have. Again, Devin Jackson's name doesn't come up, which is fine. I'm okay with it. I think you're right, but again, it's one of my favorite guys to watch, and a guy who seemed like was a huge riser. And at corner, there's still a bunch of guys. At nickel, there's a bunch of guys. So, and the crazy thing when you run through that all, no seniors, right? Yeah. And I think one junior.
Carl Williams is a senior. He's the only one.
Oh, that's right.
And there's two juniors. That's Coy Perch and Peyton Woodyard. And to your point about there's going to be attrition here, like the Woodyard Jet Washington battle will be one that could have an impact there. Because if Jet Washington shows up and takes Peyton's spot and takes his reps, he's got his red shirt available. There's going to be that opportunity is going to present itself. Or on the flip side, Peyton shows up and is by far the better player. We probably see Jet Washington redshirt, because it's probably not going to be in his best interest to play just a handful of snaps.
Yeah, I agree.
I think Washington's the guy that out of any of these freshmen, just because his body type is going to be hard to keep off the field. I think he would be used like in just a more specialized role. Like Devin Jackson is, to me, Devin Jackson's really good, but Devin Jackson's just a strong safety. Like Jet Washington, you might play him at linebacker for some reason or something, just because I think they're going to start wanting to experiment with this 6'5" guy who can move like that.
I think Carl Williams might still be a junior because he used an injury medical hardship last year.
I thought I had 2 years of eligibility for him.
I could be wrong. I had
Either,
here, but I could be wrong. I mean, it's so hard to know in these days.
Yeah,
exactly. It's annoyingly difficult, and it doesn't help that we don't get a roster printout when these guys transfer of what year of eligibility the schools predict is assessing. My point was, regardless, they're almost all underclassmen, and that is a really exciting thing to think about, big picture.
Okay, so I've got my position tier rankings here. I did 6.
All right, hit me. Let's see what we got.
D-line, edge, cornerback, safety, star, and
a lot of suspense here for that last one. Matt, you cut out. I'm imagining linebacker was at the bottom of the list.
Yeah.
Shoot.
Oh no.
You cut out right
I'm
at
back.
linebacker.
Are you guys back?
I got you.
Yeah, we got you.
So D-line, edge, corner, safety, star, linebacker. Those are the positions that we're going to be going through. And unfortunately, I just ran through my pecking order.
I thought that was your pecking order, and I was about to say I think I just kind of agree. I mean, D-line is undoubtedly. Are we separating D-line and edge? Because we could have a fun debate on edge versus D-line as the superior group.
I separated the two. I think Amari Washington and Bear Alexander are more likely to be day 1, day 2 picks than both Mateo and Tatum Tuioti.
I agree, but I think you got depth behind Mateo and Tatum that you don't have on the interior of the defensive line. That makes that a little bit of a conversation, but I agree, definitely. I think I agree with that point, but I think it's just the Anthony Jones, Nasir Wyatt, Elijah Rushing behind compared to like Jerome Simmons and DeAndre Robinson that separates those ones for me. But I think that's definitely the 1-2 is the D line and the edges for sure.
Yeah, I think those are ties to me. 1A, 1B. Corner as your number 3 is straightforward. I think that makes sense. I guess you could make a case because safety, I agree, is next, no question. And you could, I mean, like Coy Parrish may turn out to be like the best player on this defense based upon some of the upside and athletic traits that we've heard. And this was literally the best player on Minnesota's roster on both sides of the ball. That's why he was playing offense. This is a really talented player. You could maybe make a case for linebacker over nickel, just because at least you have a Jerry Mixon back, and nickel, as we talked through, like I know there's going to be a good player there, but it's like kind of unclear who it is. So that may be the thing I say with the most like conviction behind it, of like maybe we should put star above linebacker, but like I also have no idea who that second linebacker is and if they're going to be any good. So it kind of feels like a bit of a coin flip for both at this point.
And then I've ended it with, safety at 3, cornerback at 4, star at 5, linebacker at 6. And honestly, to Eric, what you were just talking about with Mixon, if that's your headliner of your worst group,
sure,
like you're in a pretty good position here. I think, I don't know. I look at Oregon's defense as the floor is really high, and yet the ceiling is also really, really high. They could take another big jump and truly have one of those opportunities to be one of the best defenses in the country.
No, I think that's a great point, because what were the thing that really stood out, from Dan and Hampton talking about the defense on Wednesday was the number of returners that are back, that are motivated and that are ready to take that step, but also like the assimilation of all this young talent that we're talking about. And so like I agree, like the baseline for this defense is really high because there's 8 returning starters. A lot of them are motivated. A ton of them are like future NFL guys. Pretty much all of them are. We should just say, like, we don't even have to say NFL guys at this point, because if you're starting in Oregon, you're probably on that trajectory. You're close. But like that's how I feel about all those 8 returners. And then as we've talked it through, like at every group, there's a couple of guys that were really exciting, intriguing younger players that could kind of rise to the occasion and maybe win jobs off starters, or at least elevate their groups and through competition. So I think that's a good way of looking at it. High floor, high ceiling, usually a pretty good combination for a defense.
I mean, it's a similar story with the offense, where compared to last season, where last year you were coming in where it was one or two guys on each side of the ball who had that experience, and now you just feel so much more confident with all of those guys, where you were going into last year starting true freshman at cornerback, and this year not only are you starting a guy with a year of experience under his belt, but now you know that Brandon Finney is one of the best corners in the country. I think that just gives you so much more confidence as a defense. I think that the high floor, high ceiling is really true for this team because they have the high floor is represented by the fact that you have all 4 defensive linemen coming back. You're going to be really good against the run. You have really talented cornerbacks, but then those ceiling raisers are those depth pieces behind there. If Nasir Wyatt can be a really super impactful edge rusher for this team, what does Coy Parrish turn into? What kind of role do they use him in? This defense has the ceiling to be the best in the country. And I think just having another year for those guys when at this point, defenses are becoming just as complicated as offenses, and almost even more so because you have to read all this stuff on the fly and see what the offenses, how they come out. And then you're talking to your other corners and your other safeties and then determining, where you're going to align your coverage to, where you're swapping sides on stuff like that. And to have that year of experience under your belt for all of these guys, these cornerbacks who have communicated with each other, I think is going to be really, really big for this defense. Just early in the year, you're going to kind of start at this baseline that you had to reach last year. And then if you're starting there, then you can just continue to build and be one of the best defenses.
All right, I think that's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. My goal was under an hour. We missed it by 58 seconds. Really close. Really, really close. But we did it. Thank you for listening to the show. We'll be back next week. We'll have more on Oregon's recruiting efforts for the 2026, 2027, 2028 classes. And who knows, maybe we dive into some more women's basketball as they continue to stack big win after big win and solidify their NCAA tournament resume and more. Plus, softball and baseball season are here, so it's time to start diving into that as well here on the podcast. So a lot to get to. We've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
See ya.